Today we want to go over a famous American poet, Walt Whitman, and just give you a brief overview of some of the high points of his extraordinary life, talk a little bit about him. So Walt Whitman was the second child of 9 children, and his full name was Walter Whitman Jr., named after his dad, but they called him Walt to distinguish him from Walter Sr. Walt Whitman was born on May 31st, 1819 in Long Island, New York, although he did most of his growing up in Brooklyn and ended his life in New Jersey. In between there, he spent some time living in Washington, D.C. and also in New Orleans. It was while he was in New Orleans that he was exposed to some of the brutality of slavery and issues related to that, and helped form some of his views of equality and support in many ways the Northern cause. And during the Civil War, he actually was in Washington, D.C., working at a hospital there for wounded vets, including his brother, nursing them back to health. So he stayed on in D.C. after the war as a clerk and worked for a time until his boss found out that he had written his most famous work, Leaves of Grass. His boss found it objectionable on moral grounds and fired him. So he had a very interesting life. As he grew up, he finished his formal schooling at 11, but he was a voracious reader, read constantly, and he loved the written word. His first job in Brooklyn was as a typesetter or printer until a fire swept through and destroyed pretty much the whole printing industry in that part of the town he was living in. He then went on to become a teacher in a one-room class, teaching several different grades as one teacher. If you've ever seen Little House on the Prairie, that's sort of what he was doing, only he was doing it in the Brooklyn area. So a teacher at a one-room schoolhouse. After that, he went on to become a journalist, founding and writing for several different newspapers. He worked as a nurse, as I said, during the Civil War, and then finally as a government clerk. During this time, he wrote his most important work called Leaves of Grass. It was self-published, and it included many of his poems, and Ralph Waldo Emerson loved his poems. And so he went through several editions, bulking it up, adding to it, as he printed these poems using what he called, or what has been styled or called free verse. And that style basically is very open and flowing and free, and he drew on themes that many Americans could resonate with, sort of the panoramic view. And we have these words here that have been used to describe him in his poetry: idealistic, free, panoramic, democratic, egalitarian, and it tapped into the times that he was living in many ways, and evoked feelings from many of those who read it that really overwhelmed me. I thought, wow, this captures well in verse and in words what I feel and what I think about my country. And so he became very famous not only in America but worldwide, and would often receive monetary gifts and other support from people all over the world as they would read his book Leaves of Grass and be moved by that and said, we need to support this guy. He was very altruistic. Often the money he received, any extra money he received that he didn't need to live off of, he would spend to buy supplies to help nurse those who were recovering after the Civil War and injured. So he spent a lot of his money on others and struggled in many ways to live his life. He certainly didn't live in the lap of luxury, but spent a lot of his money and effort on helping others. As he reached his twilight years, he had a stroke and his health declined, and he died at the age of 72 in New Jersey. Well, this has just been a basic overview then of this famous American poet, Walt Whitman. And if you'd like to learn more about this or related matters, if you look underneath this video, you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has that information. And while you're at that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.